A quiet vow. The prairie wind swept dust along the main street of Alder Creek, carrying with it the sound of uncertainty. Clara Whitfield stood outside the land registrar's office, her gloved hands clenched at her sides. The letter in her pocket, final notice, felt heavier than any trunk she owned. She had 3 weeks to marry or leave the territory. Inside the office stood Luke Carter, tall and quiet, hat in his hands. He owned land bordering the northern ridge, a ranch too large for one man to keep without a wife. Clara knew him only by reputationist, reserved, unentangled. "I'm not offering romance," Luke said plainly. "And I'm not asking for it," Clara replied. The agreement formed not out of hope, but necessity. Their wedding took place beneath a wide, cloudless sky. No flowers, no guests beyond the preacher, and a curious breeze. Clara wore a simple cream dress. Luke stood stiffly beside her, his jaw set with resolve. When the vows were spoken, Clara felt the weight of the words settle not as joy, but as finality. Luke offered his arm afterward. She hesitated, then took it. Luke's ranch lay miles from town, surrounded by tall grass and endless sky. The house was sturdy, practical, untouched by softness. "This is your room," Luke said, opening a door at the far end of the hall. "I'll take the other." Clara nodded, grateful for the space, unsettled by the distance. That night, she lay awake, listening to the wind, wondering if survival was enough to build a life upon. Days settled into routine. Clara cooked and cleaned, though Luke never demanded it. Luke rose before dawn, returning dust-covered and quiet. He showed her how to spot storm signs in the sky. She taught him how to read aloud from the paper, how to set a table, not just for eating, but for comfort. They spoke little but listened closely. Luke left small gestures, without comment extra blankets folded near her bed, coffee already warmed, firewood stacked high. Clara noticed. She mended his coats, pressed his shirts, and began leaving meals ready when he returned late. Their marriage was still practical, but something gentler stirred beneath it. The storm came suddenly. Wind howled, rain battered the roof, thunder cracking the sky open. Clara froze when lightning struck close. Luke found her standing rigid in the hallway. Without speaking, he wrapped her in his arms. "You're safe," he said quietly. She believed him. That night, by the hearth, Clara spoke of her fear of being unwanted, of being alone in a harsh land. Luke stared into the fire. "I never wanted a wife I couldn't protect." She looked at him. "And I never wanted a life without warmth." Their honesty changed something irreversibly. Luke began lingering in doorways. Clara laughed more freely. Touch came accidentally, hands brushing, shoulders touching, and then less accidentally at all. One evening, Luke stopped himself. "I won't take what you didn't agree to." Clara met his gaze. "I didn't agree to love, but I'm not afraid of it." A letter arrived from Townen. Opportunity for Clara to work elsewhere, independently. Luke handed it to her without comment. "You're free to go," he said. She folded the letter carefully. "I know." She stayed. They kissed for the first time under the stars, hesitant, reverent. Love arrived not as fire but as certainty. "I don't regret this marriage," Clara said softly. "Neither do I," Luke replied. On their first anniversary, Luke asked Clara to meet him outside. This time, there were flowers. "I want to marry you again," he said. Not out of need, but want. For yes was joyful. Years passed. Laughter filled the house. Hard days still came, but never loneliness. The prairie shaped them strong, steady, honest. Clara stood on the porch years later, watching the land sway. Luke joined her, arm warm around her waist. "What began as convenience," she said. Luke kissed her temple. "The best things usually do." And beneath the endless sky, love stayed quiet, chosen and true. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, bright and unhurried. Clara stood at the table, laughing as Luke fumbled with the bread dough. Flowers streaked across his sleeve and his cheek. "You're supposed to need it," she said, reaching up to brush the flour away. "I am," he replied earnestly. "It just doesn't listen." She laughed again, the sound filling the room in a way she once thought impossible. Outside, the prairie swayed beneath a clear blue sky. The house felt different, now not quiet with uncertainty, but quiet with contentment. Luke set the dough aside and leaned against the table. "Do you ever think about how this started?" Clara smiled. "Often." "And does it trouble you?" She stepped closer, resting her hands over his. "No, because we didn't stay strangers." Luke's eyes softened. "I was afraid you'd feel trapped." "I was," she admitted gently, "until I realized I was free to love you." He grinned, an expression still rare enough to feel like a gift. "Well then, I suppose I should say thank you." "For marrying me," she teased. "For choosing me." The kettle whistled. Luke hurried to it, nearly tripping over the chair in his haste. Clara shook her head, amused, warmth blooming in her chest. Later, they sat on the porch with steaming mugs, the morning stretching before them like a promise. Luke draped an arm around her shoulders, easy and familiar. "What do you think today will bring?" he asked. Clara leaned into him, watching the sun climb higher. "Nothing dramatic." Luke smiled. "Sounds perfect." The wind carried the scent of grass and new beginnings. There were chores to do, fences to mend, bread to bake, but there was laughter now, and trust and love that had arrived without demand. Clara glanced up at Luke. "You know," she said lightly, "for a marriage of convenience, this turned out rather well." He laughed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Best arrangement I ever made." They sat there together, unhurried, the prairie wide and welcoming around them. And as the day unfolded gently, Clara knew with quiet certainty that some of the happiest endings weren't loud at all. They were simply lived. Comment your location. Where you are watching from, so I can greet you on my next story. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Aurora Tale Wild West. God bless.